Hi there, and welcome to Algernon Pharmaceuticals Facebook Live. I'm Cyndi Edwards from PR Media Now. Well, I'm sure most of you know Algernon is investigating the use of the psychedelic drug DMT, also known as the spirit molecule, to treat stroke patients. Well, Algernon has just submitted a pre-IND, which stands for Investigational New Drug, meeting request with the US FDA for its investigation of DMT for the treatment of stroke-related dysfunction. Algernon CEO Christopher Moreau is here to tell us more about this news. Hi, Christopher.
Hi, Cyndi.
So this is exciting. Explain this for us.
Well, I actually got a call from a broker when that news came out, and he was like, "What's the big deal? You sent in a meeting request." So it's a good question. It's actually a formal process. You formally submit documentation to the FDA, and the pre-IND meeting request is it's a process that the FDA has set up so that you can get their advice and counsel and direction before jumping headfirst into a phase 1 study or phase 2. So you basically outline your plan, and it's quite complicated, and what your targets are, what your path is. You share some of your preclinical information, and it's a chance for the FDA. So anyway, just to explain the process, you file this pre-IND meeting request. Within 30 days, the clock starts ticking. You have to submit a full package to them. And if you don't, you could run into some issues. And then the FDA has, I think, 60 days or 30 to 60 to go over your information. Then they follow up. Typically, in the past, it was a meeting, not necessarily on the in person. But typically, it's a letter back where they may ask some more questions or give you direction. So it's important. It doesn't mean we have to do our phase 1 or phase 2 in the US, but ultimately they're the biggest regulatory agency and from that view, the most important in terms of getting the right advice. So you want to be on the right path, even if we're going to be doing our phase 1 in the UK. And that's why we reached out to them and why it's news.
Is this a slight change of plan? Like, why focus on its CIMT, or Constraint Induced Movement Therapy, first, rather than acute treatment right after a stroke has happened? This seems to have shifted a little bit.
No, it didn't shift.
No? Okay.
And just to explain, when we announced our stroke program, we announced that there were 2 areas we were wanting to investigate. One was what I'm going to call an acute treatment. And so we talked a bit about in one of our interviews, I think with David Nutt, Dr. Nutt, that when you have a stroke, they can't treat you until you get a CT scan, because they need to know what kind of stroke you have. There are 2 kinds of strokes: ischemic, that's a blockage; hemorrhagic is a bleed. If you have a blockage, they want to give you blood thinners and clot busters. If you are on a blood thinner and you have a bleed, it could be fatal. So typically speaking, if you are with someone, they think you have a stroke, and they're calling 911, and you get to the hospital, you typically have to wait as much as 3 hours to get that CT scan. And you may not wait 3 hours at the hospital, but just by the time maybe you've been sleeping, maybe you wake up and you don't feel well, and your partner's like, "There's something wrong here." So it can take 3 hours. So how soon can we give somebody DMT? If we can show that DMT won't be harmful to the hemorrhagic patient, because we have animal studies suggesting it helps the ischemic, we might be able to deliver a treatment right in the ambulance. Or does it matter? If you have this injury where neurons are dying because they're not getting oxygen, either because of a bleed or a blockage, does it matter if you can get treated with DMT 4 hours later, 5 hours later, 6 hours? So we have lots of questions. The other question is, how long do we treat you? Now, we found a study last week out of Australia. We've reached out to the authors that stated the most efficacious time to rewire the brain could be within 2 weeks of a stroke. Okay. So it could be a pretty big window. So suffice to say, trying to figure out an acute stroke treatment protocol. It's very complex. There's lots of preclinical work we have to do. It's much easier for us to focus initially on the rehabilitation program. After you have a stroke, within 24 to 48 hours, you're starting rehabilitation. We don't have to worry about, will it be affected with TPA? Do you need to have a CT scan first? What about some of the other drugs like blood thinners or clot busters? So we can just immediately start a study where we take patients who are going through rehab. Some will be on placebo, some will be on DMT. Can we help rewire the brain so they reduce their deficit after a stroke? That's why we're focusing on it first.
Got it. So can you explain a little bit more for us what constraint-induced movement therapy looks like?
So it's really focused on your arm. Now, okay, 85% of patients who have had a stroke will have a deficit of some type. Maybe speech, maybe personality change disorder. Their sense of humor may be off. They may be dragging their right leg. The reason why we're focusing on CIMT, it's because in the hand, you have very fine movements that can be more easily identified in terms of a delta or a change from patients who are on DMT who are not. So CIMT, they restrain your healthy arm. Typically a stroke is lobal on one side of the brain compared to the other, and therefore the opposite side of the body is affected. So they will sort of tie down your good limb, send you home for 2 weeks, and force you, with help with family or friends, to do things that you would normally do and force that hand or arm that's been affected and try to get increased motor function. So we just thought that's a good place for us to start, because the leg, more gross movements with the leg, with the arm and hand, more subtle, delicate changes that we may be able to see if DMT is helpful, and that's why we focused on it as well. But it's not to say that it won't help speech. I mean, if it's rewiring the brain, it may be quite helpful for all deficits. We just don't have any data yet.
So while someone is in physical therapy, they would be getting micro doses of DMT at the same time. Is that how you think it'll be administered?
Well, we are working through, and that's some of what we'll identify in our phase 1 study. First off, we are going to, and thank you for bringing up the point because I didn't earlier, we're focusing on a sub-hallucinogenic dose of DMT, which is in the 0.2 to 0.3 milligrams per kilogram. Dr. Rick Strassman identified that in the 90s, and there have been some additional work done by Olson. So we kind of know what that sub-hallucinogenic dose is. We don't want to send somebody who has had a stroke into a different paradigm in that experience. And so what we need to, so first off, we want to deliver this by intravenous, not a bolus dose. That's a one shot, but a sustained dose. So we want to bring somebody up to that level and then maintain. Now, we don't know yet, and we'll find out in our phase 1. We're going to be looking at an MTD, a maximum tolerated dose, sub-hallucinogenic, 1 hour, 3 hours, 6 hours. We're doing some preclinical work to see if there's any difference in the neurons depending on the amount of exposure. This will help advise us on how to run our phase 1 study, and it will help us advise how we run our phase 2. Someone comes into the clinic, they're on DMT for 3 or 4 hours, they go home for the week, they come back a week later, they get another shot. But this is keep in mind that in the in vitro experiment, when they exposed the cortical neurons to DMT, the growth happened days after. So it's not, this is a slower process. We're talking days. And so it's really quite understandable that we could infuse somebody with DMT and the results would be taking a few days. It doesn't have to be considered to be instantaneous.
Do you think you could get this into a phase 2 trial before the end of this year?
I think it's possible. It depends. You know, we announced that Charles River is doing our preclinical. So preclinical, for the folks who may not be totally aware of how protocols go, preclinical means not in man. So preclinical animal studies, they can use research grade DMT. Charles River is our CRO. They're running those experiments in Finland. And so they're happening as we speak. For the phase 1 study, where we're going to be exposing healthy patients to DMT, we need clinical grade DMT. That's going to take about 5 months to get from Dalton Pharma, the company we hired to synthesize it. If they can do it a little faster, then we'll be able to start our phase 1 faster. Think about maybe 2 to 3 months for the phase 1, could go very quick. There's a slight chance we could be in a phase 2 by the end of the year. I'm more comfortable sort of projecting Q1 of next year. I think we could be in a phase 2, and we'll do what's known as an umbrella study. Our phase 1 at Hammersmith could very well be a phase 2 as well. So, sorry, phase 1, phase 2. So we can sort of, like our ifenprotal COVID study, phase 2b3, we can move it from a phase 1 into a 2 really quickly. So that's my hope.
For anybody who's watching right now, if you have any questions for Christopher Moreau, feel free to put them up and we will ask Chris to answer those for us. Now, I want to talk to you, Chris, a little bit about whether or not you're hearing from stroke patients, because the word is out about what Algernon is doing. Have you actually been contacted by people who have had a stroke?
Oh, I get emails every day, and some of them are pretty tough. And, you know, when you read about how somebody is suffering and, you know, there's a process, people send emails, they go to info, they get screened, not everything comes to me. But in this case, and we always involve our either CMO or one of our board members who's an MD, questions are, you know, literally writing, I've just had a stroke and I'm suffering and I've got this deficit, and will DMT help me? And you just have to have a compassionate mindset, which is what we're trying to come from anyway as a company. I mean, we're trying to genuinely help people reduce either the duration or intensity of their disease or illness. And so you just have to write back and say, look, we're not at a phase 2 study yet. We'll keep you up to date. We don't know where we're going to run it. We're moving as fast as we can. But it's really sobering to get these emails from people who, especially of late, people who've been suffering from strokes, and it's some of them have never been the same. They've never recovered. They really want to know, well, DMT, maybe they had a stroke 3 years ago. They still can't communicate as well, or their thought process is slowed down. And, you know, there's limited info we can give them right now, but they're tough emails to read sometimes, but we try to respond to all of them.
Are they saying they want to volunteer? They want to be part of this study? There's
no doubt people are, you know, they're asking, and we can't give medical advice. We're not medical doctors in that context, but, you know, you can get access to DMT in certain places. And so, but, you know, if somebody's been suffering a stroke, or they'll write on behalf of their family member, my sister suffered a stroke, or my mom, and we want to help her. So, I think without a doubt, people are saying this sounds very interesting. And even David Nutt, during our last interview, said that after 24 hours, there's very little you can do. And so if DMT turns out to be helping the brain rewire and even gives people some recovery, I mean, it'll be tremendous, because right now there's very little other than prayer after 24 hours. And to me, that's just not enough.
No, the potential is extraordinary, and let's hope it goes in the right direction for sure. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about Algernon's financials. You recently announced a private placement with the total proceeds of $2.7 million. Why did you do that before the results of your phase 2b3 ifenprotal study on COVID patients?
Good question. Good question. Well, I think if you're asking that question, it depends on who you are. Are you a short-term investor? You're only in in Algernon for COVID-19. And if you don't like the data, you're out. That short-term horizon, I could see somebody saying, well, why would you do a financing? When we announced the financing, brokers are calling. One chap said, don't you believe in the data? And I said, it's got nothing to do with my believing in the data. 50% of phase 2s work, 50% don't historically. I think we have a better shot because we don't have a safety issue. But I've got the job of looking at a longer term. What if the data isn't as great? as we're hoping. And so now we're looking at a different valuation, but still a need to raise capital. So my job as CEO is to take care of everybody, not just short-term investors or medium or long-term, but everybody. And for the investor that's new to this space, we don't have any revenue yet. We have to access the markets. That's a given for capital from time to time. When is the best time? When can you do it to reduce dilution? So I thought it was a pretty reasonable round of investment. It was only 2.8 million. It brought some capital in so that I don't have to worry about a capital in the next bit. And that's how we pay for research. I mean, we have to access. So if you start there, the company needs capital from time to time. Then what's the best timing to do it? And then ask yourself, if you're allergic to it, what's your horizon with Algernon? I have to look after everybody's interests. And that's why, to me, that was a reasonable raise. It was good timing. And think about the investors who came in. They have a 4-month hold on that stock. They can't trade it. So I thought it was a good vote of confidence. Obviously, they were investors that thought, if the ifenprodol data is fantastic for COVID, we're smiling. If it's not as strong, we're not worried. The company has IPF, chronic cough, a new program for DMT. I mean, that's what I'm trying to deliver. Multiple.
Yeah, you're not a one-trick pony, that's for sure. We're hearing from some people who are watching right now. Justin says it, and I think referring to DMT, it's new and very interesting. Great job, Algernon. Keep up the great work. And then we've got Scott just wrote as well. My brother recently passed away from stroke complications. I'm very sorry for your loss. I'm happy you guys are starting this program. All the best. I mean, talk about a cause that everybody can get behind, finding a way to improve the lives of people who've had a stroke. Back to ifenprodol, we've seen news reports where doctors have had some very good results on their COVID patients and are saying that they're leaving the hospital with less scarring on their lungs. You do have results coming out in about 2 weeks, right? I know you can't say too much. What can you say about this?
Well, I'm not going to comment on what any particular doctor talked about that was outside of the bounds of the study. There is potential for ifenprodol to not only reduce the severity and duration, but because of its antifibrotic, the data we got. Let me say that from our animal studies, it reduced fibrosis in our animal studies for IPF. That's why we're studying it for IPF and chronic cough. So last March, when all of this started, and I have had questions, not only anonymously, but brokers mostly are calling, or an analyst. Why didn't you include lung scarring in your original study? But it's not really, it just wasn't an issue last March. You know, there were no long haulers. I mentioned this before in a few interviews. We just shut down the country, and we looked at the data from ifenprodol and H5N1, and we thought, you know, there was no talk of vaccines or vaccinations, not like we have today. And we based our study off the WHO, and I'd like to think they knew what they were doing at the time, and there was no talk of exit imaging and long haulers and so on. And this has only become a recent event. In fact, I've read about people who had no symptoms and they've got this glass lung, they've gone in and there's damage and so on. So there's potential for it. I think we announced that we did see that we have a reasonable, greater than 50% of our patients have an exit image, likely an x-ray. Probably you're looking at about $1 million to review. It's very expensive to add on an additional data review like this, which would require pathologists, technicians to be looking at all of that, gathering all that data. It would take time. I didn't want to add it to this study data because it would delay the data, and I don't want the data delayed. I want to get that information out.
Right.
So long answer to your question. Sorry. We think that there is potential for ifenprodol to reduce fibrosis post-infection. We can access that data. The decision is when to do it. Is it a good idea to do so? And can we do it really quickly? I mean, this took us longer because we're a small company. 150 patients, it's not a huge study, but just because of our size at the time and what was going on, it took longer to get this study enrolled and get the data out. So, but it's a very interesting development, and it's something we'll watch.
And despite the fact that people are getting vaccines, we see Italy is going back into another wave right now. Certain states here in the U.S. are seeing an uptick again. So therapeutics to treat people who have COVID-19 are going to be needed for the long term.
For sure. What about COVID-21? Sorry, 24.
Right.
We don't know what's next. And so if ifenprodil can reduce the duration and severity, could we make a case that the drug should be stockpiled, available for the next pandemic, because it takes time. It took about a year to get this vaccine going. Now, it's sort of a platform, and so they're saying they can respond more quickly. And but we need a therapeutic alternative, and that's still the hope with ifenprodil, of course.
Ryan's wondering, are you going to pay to have the lung damage data tallied?
It depends. We really want to see what the overall. I think that it would be hard to imagine we wouldn't see a signal in either less days in hospital, less days in ICU, less patients on ventilation. You know, if we don't see any signal, I can't imagine why we would be seeing less lung damage on people's exits. It's possible. So we really want to wait. We have a little bit of time. We want to look at that data. We obviously had positive trending data in December. There were less patients on ventilators, to remind everyone, in the high dose group of ifenprodil. Will that trend carry on and even get better? We are dealing with a small sample size. Everybody should be aware of that as well. Out of 150 patients hospitalized, 10 or 15% will go on ventilation. That leaves us with a smaller number to distinguish between. You know, what we want to see is that the patients that were untreated, there were more patients in that group than who were in ventilation than patients on lower high dose, but the numbers will be small. And, you know, when this phase 2 study was supposed to identify an endpoint that we would then go after in our phase 3. So all in all, there's lots of info we're going to have to parse and data. And but to answer that gentleman's question, we'll make those decisions as the data gels and we sort of get a sense as to where we're heading with this program.
And he says, makes sense, thanks. So he's very satisfied with your answer. Your stock is up about 4% today, plus. Do you credit the DMT stroke news that's been circulating for that, or the ifenprodil results that are coming out? Is there anything you can credit that to?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Sorry, that's a good answer from my view, because I can't really say what I mean. So let's just talk about what typically happens. When you have data coming out from a phase 2 study, you would expect an increase in your stock's value. Now, think of it as a horse race. Sometimes people don't bet on a horse race a month in advance. They'll bet closer to when the horse race is. So, you know, you're starting. I'm noticing there's not a lot of volume. So let's analyze it in a. You know, I think we've had 500,000 or 600,000 shares traded on the CSE today, maybe 300 or 400 in the US. So there's not a lot coming out. People seem to be watching it. There's not a ton of bids yet. Is it DMT? I don't think we're really valued yet for the DMT program, by the way. And I'm not sure if it's just investors who, maybe some investors just want to invest in DMT and they don't like the fact we have a few programs. There may be other reasons. So I'm not sure, Cyndi. It just could be a combination of things, but it's always nice to see the stock starting to move.
And if DMT is found to help with this constraint-induced movement therapy, just think of the implications this could have for more than just stroke patients. And I'm sure your brain has gone there. We're talking about people who've had traumatic brain injuries or multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease. This could have some really far-reaching implications.
Right. And we have filed our intellectual property in a very broad fashion, not just specific to stroke, for neurological conditions. I mean, theoretically, we could be having a number of phase 2 trials going on. There's no reason to think that it may not be helpful. But I think we need to do some preclinical work as well. Could it help in traumatic brain injury, Parkinson's? You know, those are sort of, consider them as chronic conditions. Can the brain be rewired constantly? I mean, I've read some stories of people who have lost their sight from a stroke, and 8 years later it came back. Does that mean that 8 years the brain was struggling to make those new connections? I mean, we just know so little about it, but it will
Imagine
be very...
if you could turn that into 8 weeks or 8 days, or
that's
who knows,
right.
The potential.
Right. Or someone in a coma, you know, it doesn't happen often. Somebody's been in a coma for years and all of a sudden they come out. What caused that? And we don't know. But if DMT is having this effect on the ischemic stroke patient in an animal, we're hoping to see that in man. And then we will investigate it if it can help out with other neurological conditions.
Okay, well, Christopher Moreau, exciting news and exciting stuff. And any last words before we say goodbye? Data
by the end of March. That's
for ifenprodal.
That's for ifenprodal for our COVID trial. That's the most exciting thing on the horizon, and so we're look forward to getting that news out to the market.
All right. Thank you, Christopher Moreau. And thanks to everybody who asked questions. And of course, you can go to algernonpharmaceuticals.com for more information, and always check out the Facebook page to see what's going on. Every time Chris has some news to share, we will update you here on Facebook Live. Have a great day, Chris. And to everybody who watched, you have a great day as well.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.